I'm Kenny Easwaran. I'm a professor of philosophy in my day job, and so this is a different sort of audience than one I'm used to talking to. So we'll see how my explanations go. But hopefully, I think I probably have too many slides, and that means that we'll have slides for questions. Okay, so this is about why I'm not an objective Bayesian. And before I get to that, I want to say, which may not need explanation for many people, but I want to be clear about it. What do I mean by Bayesianism? And so there's a basic set of commitments that I think of as the core of Bayesianism, that belief is not binary. You don't just believe things and not believe things, that it can come in degrees. And that it's useful to talk about these degrees using numbers on a scale from 0 to 1. Core ideas of Bayesianism, you don't just believe things, or belief doesn't only come in binary. It's not just belief and not belief. It comes in degrees, and we can usefully describe these degrees by numbers on a scale from 0 to 1. I'll point out later that there's nothing particularly special about the scale from 0 to 1. It just is mathematically convenient for talking about things. Oh, and it's gone again. All right, well, hopefully it stays on enough of the time that you can see it in between blinks. And then I think the important thing that makes it really Bayesianism is that these numbers satisfy the probability axioms. And then there's this further commitment that that is not just that at any time your beliefs satisfy the probability axioms, but also that they update in line with conditionalization. And we can put Bayes' theorem up there if you want to see it. Not too much of what I'm going to say depends on the details of the changing of probabilities, but I think all of this is really the content of Bayesianism. And I'm happy with Bayesianism. I'm a big Bayesian. My book just came out on the foundations of Bayesianism, so I'm happy with all this. And one important thing to note is that these parts, there's sort of two parts to it. The first bits are really just about what are beliefs, that there are these things that are usefully thought of as numbers that come in degrees. And the second part is all the stuff about what would be ideal. And I think most people are willing to say that that humans don't actually ideally live up to the requirements of Bayesianism. That it's that this is what it is to be a good believer. And so the question is why accept these rules as ideals? And I think there's two kinds of arguments for this. One, which is probably the more familiar kind, is the pragmatic argument, that if you're the kind of creature that wants to get anything done, that you care about what the world is like, and you act in the world, and you're not, then there's all sorts of reasons why you can't be absolutely certain of anything. And so you need to have some sort of procedure for governing your behavior in the world, and you want it to be such that you don't choose collections of actions that over time guarantee that you end up worse off than you could have been otherwise. And the classic example would be if we presuppose that someone, what they care about is money, and if they want to predict whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not, if they're willing to pay 60 cents for a bet that gives them $1 if it rains tomorrow, and they're also willing to pay 60 cents for a bet that gives them $1 if it doesn't rain tomorrow, then they'll spend more than $1 on something that gets them only $1. And so that's going to go badly. And this argument basically extends to why your degrees of belief ought to satisfy the probability axioms, because if they don't, then there's a set of bets you're willing to make that guarantee you lose money. And this version presupposes that you care about money and that we can measure it on a linear scale. There's extensions of this that I think are more important, starting with Frank Ramsey, but I've got a bunch of other references up there where people have updated this over the decades to show that basically any sort of creature that cares about anything, once it's got some sort of consistent way of acting in the world that guarantees that it doesn't self-undermine, or at least that makes sure it doesn't guarantee that it self-undermines, there's going to be some way of representing their values on a utility scale and their beliefs on a probability scale. And so this is one argument for why any sort of creature that cares about things and how it acts in the world should be a Bayesian. Now, there's another sort of argument that also exists that is perhaps a bit less familiar, but I think some philosophers care about this because some philosophers think belief shouldn't be essentially connected to action. I think I'm a pragmatist. I think belief should be essentially connected to action. But even if you don't, if you imagine that you're just some sort of classic neural net classifier or perceptron that just wants to accurately represent the thing that you're looking at, and you don't have any actions, you don't care about anything other than accuracy, well, it turns out if we're measuring your beliefs, how close they are to the truth, in a variety of ways, the quadratic scoring rule or logarithmic scoring rule that people usually use in machine learning have these features, but many other scoring rules have these features where if we measure your beliefs on any of these scales and your beliefs don't satisfy the probability axioms, then there's a set of beliefs that do satisfy the probability axioms that are guaranteed to be closer to the truth no matter what. And again, the person who has 0.6 degree of belief that it'll rain tomorrow and 0.6 degree of belief that it won't rain tomorrow, whether it's true or false, they would have been closer to have had 0.5 in both if we measure quadratically. And furthermore, we don't actually need to use the special features of the quadratic or the logarithmic scoring rule. There's an old result by Lindley that shows that as long as the scoring rule is differentiable, we can renumber the scale in such a way that it turns into one of these scoring rules. So I think there's plenty of reasons to be a Bayesian, but none of these says anything about what your priors should be. And the important distinction that I want to draw is between objective and subjective Bayesianism. And the most extreme radical objective view is the one that says, for any evidential situation, whatever evidence you have, there is one set of degrees of belief that is the rationally ideal one for you to have, and that all agents would agree if they had the same evidence. And then there's the radically permissive or radically subjective view, which is the diametric opposite, which says any probability function whatsoever is rationally permissible. And so Bayesianism is the only requirement. And I am going to argue for radical permissivism here. But I just want to say, most philosophers go for something in between. They tend to call it moderate permissivism because they think they are only considering the radically objective as the main point of view. I want to think that most philosophers are moderately restrictive in their views. And there's a variety of arguments that I can go into later about why I think it would be bad to try to rule out some priors, but not all but one. But anyway, the idea is, I think there's plenty of good reasons why one's degrees of belief should satisfy the probability axioms and why one should update in order to be consistent by Bayes' theorem and things like that. But there's nothing that says which prior you should have. And I realize there's some sense in which I should make some connection to prediction markets. And I think there are some ways that people talk about prediction markets that seem to presuppose some sort of objective Bayesianism. If people think that the market, if you think that the point of the market, or at least one of the values of the market, is that it's an approximation of the rational beliefs given the evidence that exists, that is a commitment to objective Bayesianism. And certain justifications that people have for prediction markets based on wisdom of crowds type arguments think that maybe there is one objectively rational set of probabilities, and everyone is a noisy estimator of it, but hopefully the noise cancels out. And so those sorts of arguments do require objective Bayesianism. But when I've actually looked through the academic literature on prediction markets, whether we start with Aumann's agreeing to disagree paper back in the 70s, or Robin Hansen's stuff in the early 2000s, or the one that about 20 economists, including Arrow and others published in Science in 2008, none of this actually depends, they don't anywhere assume anything like objective Bayesianism. In some of these cases, they assume that the people involved share the same prior, which I think even if you're an objective Bayesian, you probably shouldn't think that everyone shares the rational prior unless you think everyone's already perfectly rational, which probably most people don't think. But I think that much of the argumentation for these markets is instead goes back to work of Friedrich Hayek on the use of knowledge in society, where he says that the point of markets is to incentivize people to reveal their private information and to bring that information to bear in practical things. And I think all of that can still stand on a radically subjective view of what's going on with probabilities. Okay, so that's the background of what the question is. And now why do I go for the subjectivist view? So one thing is, if we go back to one popular view in philosophy about the way that action works, David Hume from the 18th century is one of the influential figures here. He has this picture on which action is governed by beliefs and desires working together, that when you do something, it's because you believe that that act is going to bring about the outcome that you desire. And then he has some interesting things to say about desire. He says, some of his famous quotes, "Reason is and ought only be the slave of the passions," or "'Tis not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger." And you see versions of this view in more contemporary writers. Nick Bostrom talks about the orthogonality thesis. And all of these are just different ways of saying that many people think there's no rational constraints on what an intelligent being could want. A being could want anything. There are philosophers who disagree with that. Immanuel Kant is one of the famous ones who thinks that there's objectively correct things to desire and objective values. I'm going to side with Hume here and think desire is completely rationally unconstrained. And then, of course, I'm going to update Hume and say, by belief and desire, I really mean probability and utility. There's no rational requirement on what a being's utility function could be. Now, many people, objective Bayesians, I think, have this awkward view that they have to say the desire side is completely unconstrained, but the belief side is completely constrained and completely set by the evidence. And what I want to do is claim that there's a kind of symmetry between these two, that actually both sides are completely unconstrained, and that all that matters is consistency, or at least all the arguments can give us is consistency. And one person who's influentially argued for some kinds of objective Bayesianism is the physicist E.T. Jaynes. He has this book, Probability Theory, The Logic of Science. I won't go through too many of the details of his picture, but in this book, he talks about what we're doing in science. We're trying to reason with uncertainty about the world. And he says, let's imagine that we're building a robot, and we want this robot to have beliefs about the world on the basis of the evidence. And he says we could make this robot obey any sorts of principles. And then he gives a set of principles that he thinks are essential. But the one I want to focus on is just this last one, that he assumes that if in two problems the robot's state of knowledge is the same, except perhaps for the labeling of the propositions, then it must assign the same plausibilities in both. And I think Jaynes tries to derive from this various principles for how we should constrain these probabilities. He says, in situations, so he gives this example, I know there are 10 balls in an urn. All I know is that there's 10 of the balls. Balls 1, 2, and 4 are black. The other balls are white. And one of the balls is picked. And I don't know anything about how they're picked. He says, in this situation, we could relabel the balls, and I would have no new evidence. I should have the same degrees of belief. And so he says, I should therefore have equal degree of belief that each ball will be picked. This is what philosophers call the principle of indifference, that in evidentially symmetric situations, you should have symmetric beliefs. And now the problem in this case is that the situation is not evidentially symmetric. we know that balls 1, 2, and 4 are black and the other balls are white. And that is a piece of evidence that picks those balls out. It breaks the symmetry. He doesn't tell us how we can decide that color is irrelevant to whether the ball is picked. Color is irrelevant, but the ball is relevant. And I can talk more about why I think his arguments are problematic, but all of this actually even presupposes the idea that there has to be a unique set of rules for the robot. I agree, if they have to be unique, then it's going to have to be symmetric in these symmetric cases. But I think he doesn't give us an argument for why the robot has to have a unique way of picking this out. If people want later, I can talk more about Bertrand's paradox. This is, Bertrand gives the case in the example of I'm picking a random chord in a sphere, in a circle, asking what's the probability that this chord is longer than the side of the triangle. And Bertrand gives 3 different arguments that each seem equally plausible based on similar symmetries that give 3 different probabilities for what it should be. And E.T. James tries to defuse this. He says that one of these is the correct way. I don't think there's time to go into the details right now, but I'm happy to talk about this later, why I think James's response fails. Another argument of this sort comes from Shane Legg and Marcus Hutter in their 2007 paper, Universal Intelligence, in the journal Minds and Machines. They are trying to define what they think is general intelligence, really superintelligence, I guess. And I agree with their initial points that they're saying intelligence is measuring an agent's ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments, and that it's useful to think of an agent as a function from their observations, including their reward signals, to actions, and think of an environment as a function from past actions to future observation signals. And then they say we need there to be one probability measure over environments to figure out what is the ideally rational agent here. And they argue that, or they just state, we should be accepting something like Occam's razor, that if there are multiple environments that are possible with consistent with the observations we've made so far, we should put more weight on the simpler ones and less weight on the more complex ones. And then using that, they argue in particular that environments should be thought of as Turing computable, and then there is a particular natural prior over Turing machines, which is the Solomonoff prior that gives the probability to each Turing machine on the basis of the length of its description. And then given that prior, they prove this theorem that there is a unique agent in the sense of a function from observations to actions that gets the maximal expected reward across environments according to this probability distribution. And I agree, if there's some reason to care about that particular probability distribution, then this agent, it would be the best. But I think that they were too preoccupied with whether or not they could define such an ideal superintelligence that they didn't stop to think if they should. And I don't mean the question of whether they should build that superintelligence. I mean the question of whether that is superintelligence is even what an epistemic agent should be aiming for, whether that is a more intelligent agent than some other. And I think the idea is that they are building in a prior here of the Solomonoff prior, and they don't say why an agent with a different prior should care about that prior. And so I think this is where we have to come back to what the point of the arguments for Bayesianism is. And so the way I'm thinking about this is that these arguments about what rationality requires, in order to be effective, they need to appeal to the things that the agent actually cares about. And if someone violates Bayesianism, if they have degrees of belief that don't satisfy the probability axioms, you can point to something that they themselves recognize as a problem with their beliefs. And if they're the kind of being that acts in the world, then you can point out, here's a set of actions that you're willing to take that, according to your own values, guarantee that you end up worse off. And so they can see that that's a problem with their beliefs. Similarly, if an agent doesn't care about acting in the world, if they just care about accurately representing the world, measured in terms of the distance between their degrees of belief in the truth, if they violate the probability axioms, you can always point to a different set of degrees of belief that is guaranteed to be closer to the truth, regardless of what the truth is. And so in these cases, they can see what goes wrong. Now, you might want to say, well, if someone has an irrational prior, if someone starts with prior 0.99999, that all the fossils we're going to find are just planted by God in a way to make it look like there was a past, then they're going to end up with a lot of false beliefs. They're going to see all these fossils. They're going to think of them as supporting their hypotheses. And I think they'll end up with bad outcomes, whether they're pragmatic outcomes because they're acting on the basis of these things they discover, or just in terms of their accuracy. But the issue is, I think they'll end up with I think they will end up with bad results. But the issue is that even someone with a good prior does end up with bad results some of the time. Sometimes unlikely things happen. And everyone, even if you're an objective Bayesian, has to say that sometimes unlikely things happen. And so we can't just say, you had some beliefs that led you to unfortunate actions or that were inaccurate, therefore you're irrational, because all of us have that. And furthermore, the issue is that if you take any probability function and ask, what is the probability what's the expected outcome of this? Any probability function is going to judge itself as having the highest expected pragmatic success or the highest expected accuracy. And so as a result, for any two probability functions, if they give any differences at all, there will be some worlds in which one of them does better and some worlds in which the other one does better. That has to be the case in order for each of them to see itself as having higher expected accuracy and higher expected returns. And the issue is that if I say to the creationist, I think you're going to end up with a lot of false beliefs, and here's the probability that you end up with the false beliefs, they can say exactly the same thing to me. And of course, one of us will end up right and the other will end up wrong, or I guess neither will end up right or wrong. We'll end up with better or worse outcomes. But we all admit sometimes we go wrong because we're uncertain. And both Jaynes and Legge and Hutter are presupposing one probability function as the one to use in evaluating others. And that is, I think, the conclusion they're trying to justify, and they're just building it in from the beginning. And so this is my big picture argument for why I'm a Bayesian, but not an objective Bayesian, because we can give independent third-party arguments that show that anyone who violates the tenets of Bayesianism is going to go badly by their own lights, whereas for someone who uses a different prior than you, they will just have exactly the same form of argument to give against you as you have against them. Now, I think there are some things that we can say that are a bit more objective. And to mention this, I'll tell a little joke. So a mathematician, a physicist, and an engineer were going to a conference in Scotland. And as they're on the train, they look out the window and they see a black sheep. And the engineer says, aha, all the sheep in Scotland are black. And the physicist says, no, all we can say is there's at least one black sheep in Scotland. And then the mathematician says, no, actually, all we can say is there's at least one sheep in Scotland, at least one side of which is black. And the issue here, I think all three of them are actually making reasonable inferences here. And I think they are just inferences that are reasonable for different ranges of environments. And so I'm going with the kind of concept of ecological rationality that biologists and cognitive scientists often talk about, where what you want is some sort of dispositions that perform well in the environment that is your home environment. And I think the engineer has a home environment in which it really matters to at least sometimes get things highly accurate. And you care about things that work in normal situations. And you don't need to worry about how badly you'll do in the far-off situations because you want to do something very precise here. Whereas the mathematician cares about all situations whatsoever, and they put equal weight on every single possibility. And they really want to avoid false beliefs in any of these worlds. And in fact, any of these scoring rules is generally going to put more weight on avoiding false beliefs than having true beliefs. But if you just reason like the mathematician, you end up having almost no beliefs about anything in the world. And that's not very useful if you want to accomplish things. The engineer has beliefs that in worlds very much like the actual world will end up with a lot of good outcomes, but they'll go very badly wrong in worlds that are very different from ours. And I think these are just different ways of caring about what possibilities go right and wrong. And interestingly, once we start thinking in these terms of like how much do you care about doing well in one environment versus another environment, you think about this in terms of like different species, that certain species just care about doing well in the bamboo forests of southeastern China, and they're extremely well specified for that, and they have all sorts of biases in their beliefs that do very well right there, but do very badly as soon as they're in any environment slightly different. Whereas other species care about surviving in all environments to some degree. And each way of caring about different environments is just a way of putting weights on how well the outcome in those environments contributes to your overall well-being. And that is exactly what a probability function is. It's just a way of weighting different worlds. And so really what I'm saying is that, so what I'm saying about Legg and Hutter is that they think there's a particular way of weighting all the possible Turing machines. And some people might say they're putting way too much weight on doing well in environments that are nothing like Earth. If we could imagine an intelligence that puts all its weight on the Turing machines that are somewhat similar to Earth-like environments. And that machine is going to outperform their AIXI on Earth. It'll do much worse than their AIXI in other planets, but why should it care about that? Then what I want to say here is that really the Humean picture is a kind of symmetric picture, that belief and desire are both just ways of caring. Desire is a way of ranking outcomes from good to bad, and belief is a way of ranking how much do I care about doing well in this world versus that world versus some other world. And a probability function just is a measure of caring, and someone who cares about worlds in one way and someone who cares about worlds in a different way just have different values here, and neither one is objectively right or wrong. Thanks. Okay, so yeah.
Something that jumps out to me,
Mm-hmm.
as probably obvious, but you didn't explicitly say, is
Yeah.
that this mirrors very much like what's the word for right wrong? Morality.
Yes.
It's about morality, right? Like,
Yes.
And how often the way morality is handled is you go back down to, okay, is there something we can agree on?
Yes.
And logic our way from there. And that's like when you say, is there some prior we actually can reach and
Yes.
this whole subject?
Yes.
And that's my confidence.
Yes, no, that's exactly right. And that's this very much, I mean, within philosophy, there are these big Humean programs and big Kantian programs, and I'm on the Humean side on all of this. And so I end up wanting to say very parallel things about ethics and morality, though I have more to say about that and how I derive that from decision theory and the like. But yeah.
So I'm built such that whenever I encounter arguments for subjective Bayesianism, that gives me evidence for objective Bayesianism.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Yes.
I guess, yeah, it's curious that the kind of project you're engaged in is this kind of like rational, leading us all ineluctably to the conclusion of subjective Bayesianism.
Yes.
But that seems to like presuppose, I guess you're presupposing that we all have these kind of shared world states where we want.
So it's not that I think we have shared. I mean, actually, it's the opposite. I think that each of us thinks that there's some possibilities for how things might be, and if we want to be coherent and consistent and act in a way that isn't self-contradictory, we're going to have to act in a way that distributes probability over those possibilities. And if you think some things are possible that I don't think are possible, then we're going to have different beliefs about these things. And one of us could show that this situation is actual or is not actual. But showing that it's actual is going to show that the person who thought it was impossible is wrong. But nothing else is going to affect that. And even in these cases, in many cases, it's actually hard to show that the possibility one person thought was impossible actually happened. You can often only end up showing that it looks like it happened, and there's always often going to be room for claims of illusion or deception or something like that. But yeah, I'm not presupposing anything shared. I'm just saying that there is no argument that can from the outside, be convincing to make someone reject their prior. There can be arguments that convince someone that they should have had a prior and they should stick with it. That if they don't stick with their prior, then they're going to have actions over time that where they're self-contradictory. But I also say in some of my other work that if you have one of these irrational changes of mind, if you just think, I don't care about that past person's values, all I care is that myself going forward be consistent, then if I just treat that past person the way I treat any of the other people who are radically mistaken about the world, I think too bad for them. I just want to be consistent and coherent in my action. And that gets you Bayesianism, but it doesn't get you more than that. Yeah, back there.
I was going to ask you if you, on the condition that you were familiar at all with inferentialism, how you would relate your position to that as integrated with it.
And so inferentialism, do you mean like, so I have one thing I think of under the term inferentialism is the idea that meaning is just about what inferences can be drawn with certain concepts. And is that?
More of the epistemic form about it.
Yeah.
That's driven the norms about belief already integrated into practice.
So that inferentialism is, so that certain inferences are just rationally required as sort of part of the content of what a belief is, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, that strikes me the way that many other arguments, so some things that Richard often says about things, certain responses being fitting to certain states of the world, I don't see how to get that justified. I think if you start with that idea that certain inferences really are the correct ones to make in certain situations, then that's going to constrain your prior. But the thing is, if someone doesn't have that, if someone doesn't believe that these inferences are the right ones, the question is, how do you convince them that they are? And I think you can if you think that these inferences are, when you accept that there's no way for P to be true without Q also being true, then the person's going to have to give at least as high a credence to Q as they do to P, and they can internally see why they go badly if they don't do that. But for more specific things than that, I think I don't see how you're going to justify. So, yeah.
Can I just quickly sharpen the
Yeah.
question? Like this,
Just-
would you call yourself sort of a skeptic about there would be global inferences of any sort that one thinks to that?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Would you consider yourself a skeptic as there are any global inferences that would be constrained by it?
Oh, yeah. That's right. So I think there are the it's sort of a sort of skeptical, subjectivist, pragmatist take that I have on a lot of this. Yeah. All right. So right there.
So I'm not sure I understand the difference between objective and subjective
Yes.
Bayesianism from a pragmatist point of view.
Yes.
Like what sorts of actions do they tend to take differently? I mean, they both
Yeah.
have probability distributions. They both see that other people have different priors.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's not that much difference, practically speaking. The question is just, what does it mean to be rational? And now the question is, why do we even care about this concept of being rational? And this is maybe another way that I sometimes motivate subjectivism here, that some objectivists say, well, this is what rational means. Rational means following these inferences. And I say, that's a great word you have. I'll use the word schmational to mean following these other instances. And now why should I care about rational rather than schmational? And I can see why to care about the why violating Bayesianism gets you problems, but violating one particular prior's inferences, each person expects the other to do badly. At least one of them ends up doing badly. But we all think, just because I actually did badly doesn't mean that I was irrational. It just means that I'm an unfortunately limited creature in a world that goes beyond my abilities. Yeah, Richard?
Yeah, so imagine you're a brain in a vacuum.
Yes.
I worry that there is not enough praise left on your view to explain why you're nonetheless kind of doing well in some sense, even though all your beliefs are false.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, continue to, like, the twin version of you who actually is like a radical skeptic and really believes they're a brain in a vacuum. They are, so they're right. Like, as a stark raving realist, I like to say, like, there's an objective probability distribution of the world, and so your mind, as it currently is like more likely to get things right than you're actually wrong. So there's kind of a virtue there that you have. But can you say anything about why you're nonetheless, like, there's some epistemic virtue you have, even though you're a brain in a vacuum?
Yeah, I mean, because so first, you're claiming that it's more likely to not be a brain in a vat than a brain in a vat, and I think that is what any of us would say, because we're all convinced that I don't know how many of us are convinced, but most of us are mostly convinced that we are that there's something real here, even if it's in a simulation of a sort, and but the issue is that so basically, what I want to say about the brain in a vat who is believing it's in a real world and is just unfortunately deluded is that they are reasoning well by the standards of reasoning that work in our environments. And so we would be tempted to say that's good standards of reasoning. But for someone who cares about a different set of environments, someone who cares more about the brain in the vat worlds, they would say, no, you're not putting enough weight on the possibility of being a brain in a vat. And I think there's not much we can say that that shows why they're wrong to put more weight on the brain in the vat worlds. Now, I think there are some things we can say in that, like, if you think that being a brain in a vat is incompatible with doing things that matter for the things you actually care about. If what you care about is whatever world is real rather than the world I'm seeing, then we can say, well, look, nothing I do matters here, but stuff I do matters here, so I should just act as though all my weight is over here. And but that is going to depend on the person's particular values. Yeah.
So let's say that two people have different priors conditioned by their class position.
Yeah.
Does Bayesianism have any mechanism for determining, which of those priors reflects material reality?
Well, so no, I think not, because I think what we can say, if they're both doing a reasonable job, they will both have some possibility. They will allocate some probability to things being the way they actually are. But of course, I mean, I think we need to specify the picture in a bit more detail to understand exactly what is going on here. I think there are some cases in which, and I think this is the sort of thing that actually happens a lot, is that when we see someone who has a different set of beliefs than us, it's not that they had a perfectly consistent prior and they updated in line with Bayesianism on that prior. It's very often the case, what you see is, what you often see with creationists and anti-vaxxers and the like, is that they have, like, if you can get them to pin down their views at a certain point, they'll say, well, if I saw this, then that would be what would convince me to change my mind. And then you show them that, and then they don't change their mind. And then now you can point out there is an irrationality here. You haven't lived up to your own commitment. And I think as a matter of fact, most people actually do have much more similar priors than there's any logical reason to have. And a lot of that is because we all have a lot of genetic similarities. We all have a lot of cultural similarities. We've all grown up in relatively similar environments, especially when you consider the space of all possible environments that someone could have grown up in. And so there are going to be material differences in the sorts of beliefs that people have, and class and culture are going to be some of these things that cause those. And species, of course, is going to do that too. But I think usually what's going to happen is that the one person is going to have beliefs that tend to work better in the environments that they've tended to be in, and the other is going to tend to have beliefs that work better in the environments they have tended to be in. And then when they find themselves in the same environment, at least one of them is going to go wrong. And so we can often comment on that someone has beliefs that are well suited to a different environment than the one they're in now. But Richard wants to say that even the person who has the beliefs that are well suited to the real world is more rational when they have those, even when they're the brain in the vat. And if that's how you want to use the word rational, I don't have anything to argue against that. But and so some people might want to say, well, these just are the rational priors to have. I don't have anything to convince them that they're wrong. I can point to, it goes badly for this person in this environment, and they say, well, that's not where it's meant to function well. And I think that's the extent of what we can say in many of these cases. Thank you.
So, expounding on that, I'm sort of confused, because I imagine we take as a given that people have two different priors.
Yeah.
Isn't the point of Bayesian that there's a set of experiments that will force them to asymptotically converge to the same set?
Yeah. So for any two priors, there is a set of evidence that they could observe that would make them get close. But conversely, for any set of evidence, there are two priors that are far enough apart that evidence is not enough to make them converge. And so, so this is, there's an order of quantifiers thing here that, that if you have two people, if you have just two people, then they can work and they can talk to each other about their different beliefs. They can work out what evidence would we need to gather that would be sufficient to make us come to within epsilon of agreement. But that much evidence isn't guaranteed to work for a third person. And for any amount of evidence, there are people that are far enough apart that much evidence will not bring them close together. And so for some purposes, that's great, because for some purposes, you just have a particular range of people that you want to get to agreement. And so you can find out, even as a subjectivist, for any two people, you can figure out what it's going to take to make them agree. But you just can't find something that is enough to make everyone agree, unless everyone is a finite set, that which maybe it is in most cases that matter.
So you subscribe to sort of like framework in which what someone cares about can influence their priors.
Yeah.
Like how strongly influence? Like, is there an actual sufficiently concrete description of someone's cares that will eventually precisely determine what prior they should go for, or is it just subjective all the way down?
It is subjective all the way down, but I think that's just saying that their cares could specify their prior in a precise way. It's like if you think that having beliefs that work well in a world with Newtonian physics matters a lot more than having beliefs that work well in a world with totally chaotic physics, then the right way to set your prior is to put high prior on Newtonian physics and lower prior on the chaotic physics. And it's precisely in proportion to how much you care about these worlds. It just is a measure. The prior just is the measure of how much you care about these worlds.
So is it
Yeah.
identification between these two concepts?
Yes, because really what a probability function is it's the weights on the outcomes that go into determining your decision. And those weights, we can think of this analogously to, one way that I like to think about this is that imagine that I'm not just making a decision for myself in this world. There's myself and there's many other possible worlds. There's a duplicate of me in each of those worlds. Each of those worlds is different. And imagine that what I'm doing is when I act, I'm setting a policy for myself and all my duplicates in all those worlds. And I know it will go badly for some of them and it will go well for some of them. And imagine now that instead of thinking of my decision as an individual decision, imagine that I'm a policymaker for a society. And I want to say, does everyone in this set count equally to how well the outcome matters? Or do I think that some of them count more? And And that's just what a probability function is. It's the tool for setting policies for a community that decides how much you should weight the interests of each subpart of it. And in fact, because these are infinite communities, if you want to get numerical weights, I mean, you can't just say equal, because once you've got infinities, equal doesn't give you numbers here. Yeah.
Two quick clarifying
Yeah.
questions to make sure I'm following. One, just to be clear, you are personally sympathetic to subjective Bayesian
Yes.
nature of how rationally works.
Yes.
Okay. And question two is, do you personally believe that there's a set of priors that could be identified that every human being who exists normally in society shares? Correct.
So I think not exactly. I think that there is probably some, like, when you consider the space of all possible probability functions, what you'll find is that the space of actual priors that humans have is a very tiny corner of this space. But it still has a lot of diversity within it. Yeah.
Would you would you agree that we, or not agree, but would you believe that we almost have a set of priors that every single human existing normally shares? Almost, or not even?
Well, so this is one of these problems of, like, when you've got an infinite space and I've got an infinite subspace that is infinitely smaller than it, yeah, is it almost, or is it like, is it almost all or not? And a lot of this depends. Really, it's this question, is a prior of 0.9 closer to a prior of 0.5 or to a prior of 0.99? And there are ways that it's closer to either one of them. And there's many different ways of measuring the space of possible probabilities. And basically, for some of these ways of measuring it, we occupy almost all the space. And for some of these ways of measuring it, we occupy almost none of the space. Yeah, Aiden.
Yeah, I think that I find myself in strong sympathy with the view that you sketch. And I'm curious about your view of the dialectic between the objective and subjectivation that's
Yeah.
going on for quite a while.
Yeah.
At times for the subjective Bayesian, it can feel like this is someone, a cartographer who's asking for a map that has no projection.
Yeah.
Subjectivation said, it would be great if there were such a thing, if you were to give me the one truly unbiased thing, but as a matter of conceptual structure of these maps, they
Yeah.
don't have projection.
Yes.
And we're just, we don't get to live in that world.
Yeah.
And you gave, I think, a really nice line of argument around like the self-endorsing features of these credences, that they're all going to perform well here, not there. You take yourself to be here, there's no view from nowhere from which I can disabuse with that.
Yeah.
I'd like to see, where do you think this is going to go? And also the other line of argument to move by quickly is the kind of invariance under representational shift. Like,
Yeah.
which symmetry do you pick in your gradient?
Right.
Am I
Yeah.
ignorant about the volume or the length of the size? And
Yeah.
if I pick that, I just simply, as a matter of fact, any objective prior you give me, I can show you another thing that leverages different symmetries.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the symmetry arguments, I'm not, I think that symmetry arguments are always going to be relative to a description. And I think there's problems for the symmetry arguments. But I think the real complaint I have is deeper. It's that even if there is a symmetry here, the question is, why should your beliefs respect it? And I think some of the arguments, so Jaynes says, well, there must be one thing that that is the rational set of degrees of belief. And if there is one, and it needs to be invariant under symmetries, then we can say which it has to be. But I think what the most we can say is that the rational requirements need to be invariant under the symmetries. And since I say there are no rational requirements, that is invariant under the symmetries. Everything's permitted no matter how you permute things around. And the question, there's a question, why should anything be invariant under these symmetries? And if so, why these symmetries rather than the other symmetries? And And I think there's not a convincing argument that people give for respecting these symmetries.
I want to ask basically a rewording of, I think, the last question.
Yeah.
But I would love to ask for you to recommend me further reading.
Yes.
Rather than answering, because I'm getting the sense that this is a complicated
Yes.
question, or at least for me in this
Yes.
moment, it's too complicated.
Yeah.
So the thing I don't understand is with the multiple colored balls example.
Yes.
You said this thing about how like
Yeah.
why doesn't the color matter, like as
Yeah.
as a justifier.
Mhm.
I don't fully understand why that's a problem, because it seems to me like the fact that you don't know how the colors compare is the whole point of the symmetry of like.
Right.
I understood the explanation so
Yeah.
far. Either do you have a good answer to that, or do you have further reading?
Yeah, so I've been meaning to write up this argument and I haven't done it, but it's but the idea is that James describes this setup. We've got 10 balls numbered 1 through 10, and 3 of them are black and 7 of them are white, and says my credences should be invariant under permuting the labels of the number of the ball. And I say, well, why should it be invariant under permuting the labels of the number of the ball rather than invariant under permuting the colors? If you switch white and black, then why shouldn't I say it should be equally likely to be white or black, and then within those it needs to be equal for each ball, because if I switch, so if balls 1, 2, and 4 were black and balls 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 were white, if I switch the labels of 3 and 5, then yes, I agree, this is the same, another description that looks identical and so should have the same probability. So 3 and 5 should have the same probability. But if I switch the labels of 3 and 2, then I'm not in the same evidential situation now. Now I'm in a situation where balls 1, 3, and 4 are black instead of a situation where balls 1, 2, and 4 are black. And since I'm in a different evidential situation, nothing James has said tells me that my credences need to be the same here. And as soon as we introduce the colors white and black, we break the symmetry here. Only certain permutations now are symmetries of the evidential situation. And in any case that matters, in any case where you actually try to use this, you've got something like that that's breaking your evidential symmetry. And yeah, if he just said, we have 10 balls numbered 1 through 10, and nothing about the color, then I think if we have to respect the symmetry, then each ball has to have the same probability. But if once we say balls 1, 2, and 4 are black, and the other balls are white, now we have a symmetry breaker that only certain permutations now preserve all the evidence that we have. I don't know if color is relevant to whether the ball gets picked or not. And so I should be able to permute 1, 2, and 4, and I should be able to permute 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. But permutations that cross that are no longer evidential symmetries. And I think every instance where James wants to apply this to get a result, he has these things that, like, I mean, obviously there are natural intuitions about this, but I think these intuitions are based on our physical experience, and he wants to say that these are rational parts of objective logic and independent of the fact that we know that what color the ball is doesn't matter to whether it's picked. Whereas if I said balls 1, 2, and 4 are large, while balls 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are small, then I might think, well, of course, if you're going to reach into an urn and pick out a ball, whether it's large or small might affect whether it gets picked or not. And if I don't know anything, if I literally don't know anything about color, because James has said, all I know is what's contained here, so I don't know what black or white even mean, then I don't see why he gets to say, I should ignore color rather than I should treat color as a symmetry breaker.
Thank you. That got me a lot closer.
Yeah.
I think that would encourage
Yeah.
you to rank that up.
Yes, I need to do that. Yeah. Yep, okay, thanks.